Dr. Desmond Kharmawphlang, a poet and folklorist, was born in Shillong and spent his early days both in Assam and Meghalaya. Educated at St. Anthony's High School, St. Edmund's College and the Northeastern University, he works presently as the professor in the Department of Cultural and Creative Studies, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. A bilingual writer, he translates from Khasi to English and vice versa, and has so far published 3 collections of poems in English, namely Touchstone in 1987, Here in 1992 and Homecoming in 1996. Contemporary socio-cultural concerns of Meghalaya, the cultural past and environmental changes are some of the main subjects in his poetry. Desmond Leslie Kharmawphlang's poetry is sensitized deeply by his love for folk tradition, the oracles of the past, the folk narrator, and spoken oral traditions comes out strongly in many of his poetries. In many of his works, there is also a strong romantic element with an innate charm of the small town, small love, wishes and desires. However, the violence that was taking place in the home, town and elsewhere also finds a greater reflection and introspection in his poetries. However, to have a deeper and a more personal understanding of his works and many other issues that he holds close to his heart, we caught up with this writer and poet one bright sunny afternoon. We bring for you Face to Face today with Desmond L. Kharmawphlang. Good evening, viewers, and a warm welcome once again to another edition of our literary program. Well, in another such program that we did a few days back, we had told you and we had spoken that Shillong is an abode not just of clouds, but it is also an abode of some beautiful creative people who have been writing their creative skills for many decades now. Well, today I'm in the midst once again of one such gem, one such creative personality, and he is none other than Desmond L. Kharmawphlang, who is a poet, a folklorist, and presently also a professor in the Department of Cultural and Creative Studies, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong. So, once again in this face-to-face, let's understand Dr. Desmond L. Kharmawphlang a little bit closely, a little bit personally, and let us more importantly understand the works that he writes, what are his inspirations and everything that actually comprises his creativity, his creative side. So very, very good evening once again to you and a warm welcome to Doordarshan Kendra Shillong.
And
thank you very much for your time out. Well, so let's, Desmond, if I can call you as let's begin it from the very beginning. Before you really became a poet of an established nature, what you are today, let us go back into time, a few decades down under. Take us into the pages of history and share with us a few moments, a few glorious years of your childhood, your education, and how did, this poetry and this creative writing begin for you?
Well, thank you once again. I was born in Shillong and that makes me a native of this place. I grew up here. I pursued my education, school, right through college and university here at Shillong. I attended St. Anthony's High School, and after matriculating from that school, I joined St. Edmund's College, where I picked up my honors in English. Thereupon I joined Northeastern Hill University in the Department of English. I also prosecuted my PhD from the English department.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's been English all along. Was
Yes,
English,
yes.
the subject English literature, always your your preferred subject, something that was close to your heart?
Yes, I can say that because I still have this tremendous love for reading, and and this, I suppose, brought me very close to the language. And I was fascinated by the kind of worlds and realms that these books opened up before me as a child, as a young man, and even today.
Right.
Well, I'm well into my 50s, I still have this great love for books, for reading, um, and so it's this abiding love for literature that has probably made me what I am.
Absolutely, yeah. Because we have also studied a number of poems, poetries, Shakespeare, Keats, William Wordsworth. I remember reading all those, and they were all from the Romantic period. So, what kind of, literature, what kind of, authors actually fascinated you? Because now, when we talk about you today, you have not just secluded yourself to, to nature or to romance. You have moved also to folklore, to culture. So, how did that progression come about?
Well, there is a very interesting twist in this. I was, after picking up my master's, I was teaching at a college in Shillong, Rai Laban College, for a year.
Okay.
And I was teaching romantic poetry and criticism and things like that. But then I could also see that there was somehow a disconnect between the stuff that I was teaching and the kind of reception that that the kids were having about all this stuff. I mean, they were appreciative of many things, but then I could still see that some of the things could not really relate to their own experience. It was at about this time that a friend of mine, who's no more, who was a self-taught folklorist, Don Bokti Lalu, a very well-known scholar and a writer, he invited me to go with him on one of his trips to the Bhoi country, to Ribhoi. I readily agreed because I had been fascinated by stories and narratives about Bhoi, and so I took this trip with him, and we toured some very remote areas in Ribhoi for about a week, staying in people's homes, interacting with them, eating their food, knowing their ways, trying to help them in their household chores as best we could. And I was also given this opportunity to see the village and the surroundings and the wilderness, which was simply fabulous. When it was time to return, Badon Bok came back home, but I opted to stay back for a couple of more days, which I did, and that changed things for me in a very, very theatrical way, in a very profound way. I decided that I should research this area. I should research this, this oral discourse, which I had only sampled a little bit. The stories and the songs, the narratives and the ritual systems which people were constantly talking about, the belief systems. This is how I got interested, in folklore, and it was also that year when I, got this opportunity to join NEHU as a lecturer in the then Center for Creative Arts.
Right.
It was a center. It was a very small entity then, which had just one teacher, Professor Bare, who's no more. So I joined as a lecturer there. That further provided me with the opportunity to travel a little bit in my own land, and also to come across and to meet and encounter people coming from, villages. Because the work entailed such encounters. In '91, I was invited to Switzerland to participate in a poetry reading program, and it was there that I met folklorists, anthropologists of really great standing. And after having interacted with them, I decided to pursue the study of folklore, which we call folkloristics, the science of folklore, to pursue folkloristics on a full-time basis. I got myself registered in the English department for my PhD, and I worked on aspects of Khasi folk literature, and I never looked back.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you were narrating all this only, I could just see through your eyes the fascination, because the Khasi folk, the tradition, the culture is so beautiful, so myriad, so diverse. Yet there's so much of romance in it, so much yet to be understood, to be realized, to be tapped, to be fathomed. Right. But then let's now come to some of your early works. Now, how and what was the first early work that you began? Like, was it poetry that you began with?
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed it was. You see, I also had the good fortune to grow up as a boy in a very small place in Upper Assam,
Okay.
because my father was in the Assam Civil Service of the then undivided Assam.
Okay.
So he was posted in a very small place called Gilamara in Upper Assam. It's a wonderful place. The childhood memories that I have are still very, very graphic about the place. And being there and experiencing, the so-called rustic life at first hand, I suppose that was the germination of this urge, to write. And I still remember, the profound effect that sunset had, on me, as I experienced it in the backyard of the house where we lived, and the mighty Subansiri River, where we took boat rides very frequently when it wasn't flooding, and also the encounters that I had with people there. These were the first things that made an impression. The flight of wild ducks, which I still constantly dream about and still write about. I mean, these are things. These images are very graphic, and they're very powerful and profound. They still play, a very significant role in the kind of writing that I do. So when I came back from there, I started penning down these thoughts and impressions and images, and these poems got published in the school magazine and so on. I mean, it was a kick, to see your work being printed.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's how it started, and I guess I started getting much more serious when I was in college. Yeah.
Right. So you have not kept yourself secluded and sort of boundaried into a particular area or arena. You have, as you said, your imaginations, your thoughts took flight to other directions,
Yes.
other areas also.
Yes.
But still, in spite of all that, have you restricted yourself into certain arenas, your boundary of thought? Which are your strong points when you write?
Well, reflections on nature come very, they come
Easier.
very easily and very
I think
naturally.
Shillong and our hills here and around northeast has plenty to give
Absolutely,
you that.
absolutely. Because there is this almost symbiotic relationship that you experience with nature. I mean, you cannot help but write about nature.
Right.
See,
Right.
so that is one very strong, urge which continues to play a very great role in my writing style and in my writing characteristic.
Right.
Yeah. But then I also like to make social comments, and but what actually drives many of these things are the profound sense of tradition that we have and which I was taught by my grandmother. Yes, she never allowed us to even use the Sora or the Chera dialect of Khasi in the house. She insisted that we use the Milim dialects, which and Milim happens to be our ancestral village.
Right.
So and she kept on inundating our sensibilities with stories and with anecdotes and proverbs which her grandmother brought back from the ancestral village. So these were the first impressions which I grew up with, being fully conscious of those things. And then later on I found that they became very foundational. I mean, whenever I talk about nature, I just cannot help but going back to the mythic, or using the mythic metaphors which inform nature and things like that. Yeah.
Really interesting, like how you just narrated about the the combination of nature and folklore, because as we are sitting right now in the premises of Nehu, I mean, there's a pitter patter rain going on, a little unseasonal perhaps a little bit during this time of the month or the year. But yet this is what Shillong is, full of fascinating tales that happens every single day. But then let's come to another aspect now, and that is, a more serious aspect perhaps, like the evolution of Indian writing in English in our country. Do you think that the country has really arrived providing that big splash that one can see post Rushdie, after say the late 80s and the early 90s?
I'm sure it has. You see, because there is no denying the significance of the English language. Lord Macaulay, through his doctrine and through his intervention, in introducing the English or the Western system of education to India, has had this very tremendous influence and impact on the kind of writing also that takes place. And India has really produced great writers using the English language. The fact that the National Academy of Letters, the Sahitya Academy, the fact that it itself accommodates and reserves, a very large component of its activities, of its projects for literature written in the English language, also goes to show, that it acknowledges, the existence of this idiom parallel, in coexisting with the other Indian languages. And indeed, we have produced some very important writers, and many writers are, almost you hear about new names emerging almost every year, and they are making very profound impact actually in the literary scene. So I think, and India is regarded factually as the place which has produced, great literature written in the English language.
But thereon, how do you see, the evolution of this in the Northeast? Like, are they being able to, sort of compete at that level? And or do we not have to see that kind of competition, because this is quite separate, quite unique on its own? And in writing, do you think there is a concentration now on writing in English than in their local language?
Yeah, the issue of literature being written in English in the Northeast is again another fascinating domain. As a phenomenon, as a literary phenomenon, it started a little late, because recognition came very late. So-called mainstream writers were being spoken about, they were being published, and so on. But that does not mean that people were not really using the English language in writing stuff here. People were already writing in English, and especially in those states where the system of education is being sustained through the English medium. Shillong is one such place, obviously, and this has actually and the publication of journals and magazines and so on, this has also helped. It has helped in promoting interest, and not only interest but also in giving platform and giving focus to writers here. See, the Telegraph magazine used to have a poetry page, which was really of, it was of excellent quality. The page was edited by Jayanta Mahapatra, and many a time you see that Northeastern writers used to figure, in these editions very, very frequently. I suppose this was, one of the biggest, this was how the literature of this part of the world found, focus.
Right.
Yeah.
And talking on that, taking a cue on what you just said, a platform is required, right? I mean, there are many young budding writers here writing, but perhaps they're not being heard. They don't have the right place where they can express themselves. And incidentally, you in the early 90s had brought out a poetry magazine called The Lyric.
Lyric, that's
right?
correct. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about it, because you try to accommodate a number of Shillong-based poets also in it.
Absolutely, yes. Well, talking about Lyric is very nostalgic because we, worked to bring out Lyric in order to facilitate or in order to give articulation to the poetic voices that we had, in the city. We started that magazine in 1982 or 83. There was Abhi Gupta, Ananya Sankar Guha, Robin Singh Angom, and myself. So we saw that there was this tremendous potential of people who were writing, who were trying to find their voices, and who were trying to give articulation to their creativity. But there was no platform, so we worked to create this platform through this journal, which was called Lyric, and I think we succeeded in bringing out at least 5 issues of Lyric. It started as a tabloid, it grew in strength, and it also grew in size. And finally, we were able to manage. To get even sponsorship from abroad because of the, because some of the earlier publications attracted, attention from abroad. So, Lyric indeed served a very important purpose of giving focus to voice and voices emanating from
bring
here.
it back once again?
It will be a tremendous task, actually, not impossible, but it will be very challenging to bring it out once again, because as you know, many of us are now full-time scholars. Some are administrators, some are doing something. It's difficult to even get together to talk about
Perhaps if
it.
you can involve the younger lot, they can take.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
can be the guiding force behind. All right. Now let's come, since we're talking now, we would like the listeners, the viewers who are watching this program, would like to hear you read one of your pet poem or something that you love to share with us right now.
Okay. I'll read from this anthology, which was published in Wales, and I'll read this poem, which talks about my experience in Bhoi area. And by the way, this poem is also included in the third semester, in the syllabus of the third semester syllabus of the English department in Delhi University.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
The poem is entitled Letter from Pahambir, and Pahambir refers to a village.
Right.
Letter from Pahambir. At sundown, we set out in a car, past silent, dark huts, cicadas buzzing the dusk. We have left the church far behind, glowing strangely in pallid arrogance through the dust kicked up by our passing. Village curs turn quarrelsome as we city men await the verdict of reception, smoking uneasily outside the village chief's abode. We come, I plead, to learn, not to teach. We come with longing. We are the forgetful generation, our hearts tapping a rhythm spawned in shame, a shame that splits our present from our past. We have suckled for so long on a wisdom of falsehood. We are ourselves our own worst enemies. A fire dances crazily, throwing shadows on the hard mud floor, and good laughter swells like moonlight. someone breaks out in song and hardened feet tap unsteady punctuations around the weird tune. Voices intone, hands fashion leaf plates to hold food for the men from the big city. I shove more brushwood into the fire. Udi Singh squats on the floor, gnarled hands extended, hooded eyes stealing tiny lights from the fire. See this dipling spattered with good red mud. It has stored centuries of prayers for harvest, a hunt. Our bellies understand hunger, our hands are shaped by it. It is black as only good smoke can make it. It has told my children stories for countless years now. So wait for the night to grow and endure our difficult ways. Udi Singh strips to loincloth and bears a hunched back, scarred like a honing stone upon which hungry blades lick like tongues. With trembling voice, he gazes blindly at the night, tension cording his throat like vines, tying everything into a knot of one race of skin and blood, chanting the songs. The stories burn our memories like a distant meteor, searing the unnamed gloom. By their light I examine the great hurts I carry in my soul for having denied my own.
Okay, wonderful. I think, use of language, words, expressions, thoughts, everything.
Thank you.
And that, I think, is very important, isn't it, while writing? Your language has to be very strong.
Yes.
So how does one strengthen one's language?
Oh, that's a difficult one. But I suppose it will come with practice. I think it's
reading helps.
reading helps.
Yeah.
Reading. I mean, there is nothing that can replace reading for language improvement. And then and reading also gives you tips how to organize your language. Reading also helps you play with words, play with syllables and sounds and so on, so that you can actually visualize. There's this correlation between words and sound. So that is very important. And you can, and the trick is that you visualize that you're reading before an audience, and how you would like to organize your words, your sentences, and so on. So I think literature has taught us, these things. That is, if you read literature, from your heart and with depth, with
you
depth.
have to be involved in it, because this is, I think, sometimes lacking with the younger generation. Because when you see them, they lack the expression. They know the matter, but they don't know how to write, how to express themselves, and thereby what they write doesn't make sense. I think that is what I have encountered when I am mixing around with the younger lot of today. All right, now let's come. But then, when I was hearing you read this, is there any conflict in you also that gets reflected in?
Of course,
What are those kind of conflicts?
It's very much
that
obvious
you,
there.
that you have in you, which gets.
The most obvious is the city-village divide. It's very obvious. It's very much evident. Okay, and in some ways, we have been conditioned to sense and experience it for some very strange reasons. So I'm talking about this experience when I first went to these villages, where they looked at me with suspicion. They thought I was there to try to teach them, or I was there to try to proselytize, to preach or something. I had to tell them repeatedly that I have not come here to teach. I have come here to learn. Now that completely took them off guard, because they never thought that a person who comes from the city, the know-it-all, would come here and very humbly offer himself to be taught. But then it is also an expression of the kind of experience that I have seen happening around me, where we usually tend to exercise this uncalled for hegemony. Whenever we go to a village, it's always our point of view and not yours. But now, Bhoi has provided me the second stage of my learning, and that is a far, far richer learning, which I'm experiencing till now. So what I am, what I have done, what I have achieved in life, and the fact that I get, invited to lecture in different parts of the world, has all been through Bhoi. And I do not lecture about Shillong or about my Khasi ancestry or something. I mean, even if I do that, they're all connected to my work which I have done in Bhoi.
Yeah, and talking about your works, tell us your enriching experience that you had when you traveled abroad, when you spoke, when you related to people from other languages, how they could sort of take to your kind of writing. What was your experience, if you can just share it with us?
As I had mentioned, my first trip abroad was to Switzerland, where I was given this huge exposure to the kind of writing, to the kind of artistic expression, that are being practiced, where art is not only confined to the conventional painting, sculpture and graphics and so on, but it could manifest itself in so many diverse ways. And of course, how art sometimes also is a combination of many of these performances. So the first poetry reading which I did outside my country was in Switzerland, where I shared the stage with an American poet, and there the stage was actually a huge piece of sculpture. Yeah, we stood on this piece of sculpture and we gave our readings. So that was something which I had never experienced before. So it was a little unnerving, but then it was very new and quite exciting as well.
And this is what exposure does, doesn't
yes,
it? I mean, it enriches you.
Absolutely.
It opens up the world.
Absolutely, yes.
And now let's come back to the folklore that we were talking about. Professor Desmond, how do you see the strides taken by several folklorists like you yourself in documenting the rich folklore of the Northeast?
Well, it's interesting that you're using the word documenting, because folklore started as a documenting or documentation effort. Okay, when people like the Grimm brothers, when they were collecting those fairy tales, or Makian, when Hans Christian Andersen was collecting, they were mere collectors. I mean, they were not folklorists. They were not subjecting this information or this body or this corpus of material to analysis. They were interested more in documenting. The same thing also happened in the Khasi Hills, where we had some magnificent examples of documentation, which were prosecuted in the last part of the 19th century. But we have moved to the stage of analysis also now. I'm not saying that I'm very happy with the current status of folklore studies, but I think we have made a beginning, because we are now subjecting this huge corpus of material of folklore to analysis. We are studying them, we're trying to analyze them, we're trying to interpret them, we're trying to find meanings, we're trying to find relationships in these things.
But you just now said that you're not happy with the way things are happening now. So what would be your input? Like what do you see? What do you want the changes to be like?
Like I said, the fact that we have only started a full-fledged MA and PhD program in folkloristics, is helping the effort a little bit. But till now, we are still very much, stuck, in this groove of documentation. I think we should go beyond that. We should surpass the documentation. Not that documentation is not important; it is important. But I think we have to move beyond that stage and go to analysis, because it's only through analysis that you can actually create so-called grand theories of folklore, which will actually catapult the study into a serious discipline.
Talking about the seriousness of any discipline, and one discipline is the writing of poetry. But then there are also another segment who would say that poetry doesn't sell. What do you say on this?
Yeah, poetry doesn't sell. Yes, that's.
How to increase the market of this, so that people get to read? I mean, they are more into novels, into prose,
Yes.
into others.
Yes.
But poetry, I mean, somebody picks up a book of poems and.
I mean, even works by Nobel Prize winners do not sell. Because poetry has always been regarded as exclusive. I mean, it's a false notion, I think, because good poetry should appeal to all.
Absolutely.
Okay, but then there's this perception that it's only certain people who can actually read, digest, understand, and consume poetry, which is false. Good poetry will appeal to all, I think. So this mindset has to change.
Yeah, but then how do we also enrich the writing of poetry, so that it appeals to one and all?
Well, I think it's the best way is to get our kids to go back to books.
Okay.
Because to go back to books, because books is by reading, that is the only vital encounter that a child will have with reading, and the child will find that his or her mind will open up, through reading. I mean, this year we are talking about the 150th anniversary or the sesquicentennial celebration of Alice in Wonderland. I mean, how many people know that? Alice in Wonderland was published in 1840. Well, it's 150 years. And how many children know about Alice in Wonderland?
And today's children, especially.
Today's children,
Yeah,
I'm talking
when I was
about.
a child, I did read Alice
Yes,
in Wonderland.
of course.
I was so fascinated.
Fascinating book.
And I used to picturize myself in a situation that Alice was.
Correct.
Yeah.
So this sense of wonder, which work like Alice in Wonderland and Treasure Island, and I'm afraid it has diminished now. The sense of wonder in the kids.
Yes, that is a very, very important point that you just shared. But then, all good things almost comes to an end, and we are almost also coming towards the fag end of this, conversation of face-to-face with you. Unfortunately, you are already in this field for so many years, writing, teaching for over 2 decades now. Where does one see Desmond L. Kharmawphlang in a few years from now as well?
Factually, in the university system, people retire at 65. So I still have another 14 years to go. But I still, I'm very much conscious that even if I come to the age of superannuation, I will not be resting on my laurels, as it were. But I will do many things. As I speak, there's a book that's in the press, and probably I'll write my memoirs in a village.
All right. Okay, because that is where
I will
heart
retire
is
finally.
still there.
Yes,
I mean,
of course.
You've taken so much of inspiration from there on.
Absolutely.
You said from the beginning and up to
Right.
now. We would like to end this face-to-face conversation with you, Desmond. If you could just share with us once again another of your poetry, something that we can visualize it as you read as well. We would like to visualize it. So, which would be the next poem that you would like to share?
Okay, a short poem called Umyam, about our very iconic Umyam, written some years back on 19th August. I had gone fishing there with friends and some relatives, and suddenly this poem came. It was raining. I wrote this on a cigarette packet, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Umyam, August 19th. Stones scattered in the shallows around my feet, describing tales on the shore. Cicadas pierce the air, drowning the energy of coal trucks far away. The gathering clouds watch mutely this contest of wills. Down at the lake's edge, water darkens like an angry secret, and into its fold I drop a stone. Suddenly, like a storm of heartbreaks, the rains lash, and everyone is strangely happy.
Wonderful. It just describes the way Umiam is till now.
Right.
Okay. Lastly, I just don't want to end this conversation. There's so much to learn from you, understand through your eyes, through your thoughts. But then, those, so many of our younger lot who are watching, for whom you are the icon, you inspire them. What would be your words of inspiration for them as we sign off this conversation with you right now?
Well, visit yourself. Try to experience your conscience more often. Look around you, and you will hear, that still small voice talking to you. If you listen to that still small voice talking to you, then I think you have arrived. I think you have realized the meaning of being human.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. It's been an
Thank you.
honor. Words will not suffice really what this experience has enriched me as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you too.
Desmond, for giving us your time, your such precious time, and taking out so many pages from your life and sharing them with us. Thank you once again. We wish you all the very best in life
Thanks
and
to
your
you too.
writings as well. Well then, viewers, that is how Professor, Doctor, Writer, Author, Folklorist, call him by any name, that is all about a little bit, I guess, it can't be all. Desmond Kharmawphlang is all about. I hope we have been able to capture a part of him in this conversation, and we really look forward to capturing many other parts in the near future. Thank you very much for joining us in this face-to-face conversation. While Desmond's love of the enchanting present, the mysterious past, the splendor of folk tradition, and the all-encompassing beauty of this land has made a bold resonance time and again in many of his works, but at the same time, we also come across his anger, anguish, despair, ironies in many of the situations that this land faced and had to go through, that has made quite a splash and has been depicted as well. What undoubtedly came up front was the author's deep sense of involvement in what he thinks, and what has flowered into beautiful pieces of poetry that has also found its ways in different faraway lands and creative arenas, and what has so rightly been acclaimed and recognized in many a circle. His ever active and thoughtful mind continues to weave a magic which flows out from the depth of his heart. And while we had an enriching experience in our conversation with Desmond Kharmawphlang, a poet, a folklorist, as well as presently a professor in the Department of Culture and Creative Study, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, but at the end, we thought it would only be right and proper to leave the writer for what he is best known as. Yes, to produce more of his magical thoughts to fruitful poems, folk tales, and stories for generations to read, comprehend, and marvel the skills and wisdom of this creative genius.